The first American Pope is assuming office at a time when the idea of America as a force for good in the world is under real threat. Two of the most important people in the world are American, the Pope and of course, obviously the American president. And they could not be more contrasting. They could not be more different. And I had this surge of happiness and hope when the Pope was selected, because he was showing the world a different side of America. And I think showing the world a better side of America. And to have that presented as the leader of the world's largest church is now an American who embodies those values, it helps show the world that there's more to us, obviously, than Donald Trump and MAGA.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. Look, this is we're getting into the part of the summer and spring where you kind of sit back and you contemplate the world and you have a nice little drink and enjoy life. Well, I've got someone to help us kick that off. My friend David French will be joining us to help us start thinking about a few things. He's an opinion columnist for the New York Times, where he writes about law and culture and politics, religion, armed conflict. He covers the globe. Prior to the Times, he was a senior editor at the Dispatch and a columnist for The Atlantic. In 2007, 2008, he served with the 2nd Squadron, 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment in Iraq, where he was awarded the Bronze Star. He's the author of Divided We Fall, America's Secession Threat and How to Restore Our Nation. He's one of the best minds in this space, and I'm so glad. David French will be joining us for a wide-ranging conversation right here on the Michael Steele podcast, coming up right after this. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. It is so good to have you back in the house, as always. I am really happy and excited about this conversation. You guys who have followed me and listened to my podcast know how I feel about David French. I am a huge David French guy. I've been following his career, his writing for a long time. I advise everyone to do the same. And it's a real treat to have David with me on the podcast, man. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Michael. It's great to see you again, and I always have a great time chatting with you.
We do. We have a lot of fun. What I love about conversations with David is that I can slip in and out of politics and religion real easy. With some other folks.
Hey, if you want to also throw in like Marvel movies and NBA basketball, we can do that.
I was going to say, yeah, it's a wide array of places we can go. So, with this on both of those fronts, David, it has been real interesting dynamics of politics and religion, really sort of taking front and center in the news cycle for sure. But just the stark contrast with the election of Pope Leo XIV, Robert Prevost, formerly Cardinal of the Catholic Church, Donald Trump and his pretend Pope, sort of AI generated image. And it just, you wrote a couple of things which we'll get into. I did something very similar, but just taking an assessment of what the Pope's election said to you about this moment that we're in right now.
That's a great question. I wrote a piece about it, and the opening sentence was something like, Donald Trump is no longer the world's most important American.
Yeah.
And what I meant by that was that this is a really stunning moment, quite frankly. I remember the moment his name was announced, I thought, wait, that sounds like a pretty American name. Bob Prevost? I mean, gotta be. Like, I even thought it sounds like a Midwestern name. And here he is, Chicagoan, White Sox fan. And it's very interesting to me because the first American Pope is coming into, is assuming office at a time when America, the idea of America as a force for good in the world is under real threat. And, there's been a lot of stories about how the conclave made its decision, but whatever their thought process was, there is a very interesting contrast that is happening now. And that is two of the most important people in the world, not just one, are American, the Pope and of course, obviously the American president. And they could not be more contrasting. They could not be more different. And I think I had this surge of happiness and hope when the Pope was selected, because he was showing the world a different side of America. And I think showing the world a better side of America. This is a really big country with a lot of different cultures and subcultures. And what he was showing is a part of American life really that I'm more familiar with. And that is people who are faithful followers of Christ, who try to love and serve disadvantaged and marginalized people. That's been a lot of my experience in the church, especially before the Trump era. And to have that presented as the leader of the world's largest church is now an American who embodies those values. To me, it gave me a real sense of hope, and it helps show the world that there's more to us, obviously, than Donald Trump and MAGA.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. You framed it that way in your piece, and I took note of what you said at various points. One, I'm not a Catholic; I'm an evangelical, but I devoured Augustine, who is sort of the patron saint for my spiritual journey. Always identified with Augustine because he was such a badass. He was so resistant, but at the same time welcoming of that conversion journey, which his mother Monica prayed for incessantly. And he this is a guy who had concubines and lived a life of debauchery and wildness, and was just, like I said, a badass. But in that critical moment, which is why I think something about the Augustinian charism spoke to me as a young man, still does to this day, that it was a recognition of the world, right, in his behavior and his lifestyle, but then also an appreciation and a welcoming acceptance of that conversion, the Spirit of God sort of coming into the moment and transforming us. And that's something I noted about this Pope right out of the gate when he started the conversation with the world with peace be with you all, which when you think about how the last two popes started, their first conversation was about themselves. Pray for me in the case of Francis, and I'm just a humble servant who's been chosen to serve in the case of Benedict. But this Pope, Leo, looked at the world and said, peace be with you. And I just in that moment was like, wow. And then what you wrote about sort of clarified and emphasized a lot of that aspect of the humanity of all of us and the values that we have. And so it will set up, I think, a very interesting contrast and conversation between the political and the spiritual, faith-filled worlds, particularly for a number of, because you referenced this as well, a number of our evangelical friends who tend to be a little bit more consumed by the politics than the faith.
Yeah. What I found so interesting is if you're a partisan Democrat or if you're a partisan Republican, you would find things to like and not like about the Pope. In other words, the Pope, he is outside of the political categories, which is exactly where he should be. I quoted Dr. King in the end of my piece, whereas that the church is not the leader of the state. It's not the master of the state or the servant of the state. It's the conscience of the state. And I think that is one thing that we have lost in this highly politicized religious world that we live in now, is that we have now started to see the church as a partner of the state, or as the church as the leader of the state. And it is not, and it should not be. And, especially in these evangelical spaces, there's this real fear that if they don't win at politics, they lose the church.
Well,
And if
it's interesting you say that, because it was such a powerful quote, and for you when you wrote it, it was probably just like an obvious statement. But for me, when I read it, I was like, damn, this is it. You say, and when you believe the success of your religion depends on the success of any politician, it's only a matter of time before politics becomes your religion. Right. And that's true whether it's the evangelical faith tradition. Within my own Catholic faith, we've got this I think unseemly and unnecessary battle between hard right traditionalists, who live in the Tridentine Mass and the Council of Trent and Vatican, Vatican I versus Vatican II, and I'm like, dude, just give it a rest. I mean, this is not a political battle between the right and the left and the conservative and the liberal. That's not what this should be. But our politics has now become so infused in everything we do that it drives the outcome, as opposed to those. You and I both remember a time where faith informed our politics, where faith informed our culture, where faith informed our civic behavior and our civic duty. Now the politics is driving all of that.
Well, and really, honestly, Michael, look, I only live here. I don't live in other countries. But my sensation of the changes in America over the last 15 to 20 years, one of my sensations of the change is that politics really does seem to be replacing religion in a lot of people's lives as a source of meaning and purpose. And so, and they're not doing it explicitly.
Is it because they can't wrap their head around a loving, forgiving God, or what? I mean, in other words, when I see an image of Donald Trump with a halo and sort of the vestiges of Christ, in these AI configurations that they come up with, or as Moses or something, I'm sitting there going, what are you doing? What is your problem with God that this is your go-to?
Well, I think if you look back sort of towards, and I'm much more familiar with the religious right than the religious left, but I have, experience with both, but more with the religious right. And the one thing that I know about the religious right is the theory of change of the religious right for a very long time began to shift from cultural to political. Mm-hmm. In other words, in fact, the very existence of the religious right as a political concept is because of this emphasis on the political as the means of sort of changing and / saving the nation. And so you began to see, and in my experience, an increasing number of Christians who had a theory of change about American society that began from the top down, politics down. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, that's very different from the Jesus model and the Jesus theory of change. Very, very different, starkly different. And there is one of the founders of the modern religious right, a man named Paul Weyrich, towards the end of his life, began to express some like regret and ambivalence about the thing that he had helped create. Yeah. And you can really see the reason for that now. And the reason for that is because you began to really drill into, and when I say drill into, I mean, this became sort of a part of the background culture of evangelical America, which is when you're going to win, you're going to save and redeem the nation in part, and in large part, in ever increasing part, by capturing the commanding heights of the country. And there's even a name for this theology. It's called the Seven Mountain Mandate. And in the Seven Mountain Mandate, there is this theology that says that Christians are destined to rule all the seven mountains of culture, like media, the government, industry, education. So again, top down, and that makes politics into a religion.
But that's not what Christ talked about. It is nowhere near how this all began. I mean, Christ today would be overturning the tables in churches all across the globe in the Christian tradition right now. I put it this way when I think about what you just said, because I have thought long and hard about it, and in so many ways and so many levels. And what struck me, David, and I may have mentioned this to you a time or two ago, but Christians today, in so many respects, have become the very people who were in the Colosseums. They become the people who were in the arena
Cheering.
watching the events.
Watching, yeah.
Right? They become like them. They're no longer the figure in the center of the ring facing the lions, facing the gladiators, facing their death for their faith. They've become the men and women who sat there and passed judgment on the persons in the arena who didn't believe or believed something else. I don't know what it is, but they've become the thing that once persecuted them, as they now seek to persecute others in various ways. I mean, yeah, I was going to say this idea that, Christians have to dominate the powers of government and law. And I'm like, really?
And also we now know that doesn't necessarily lead to a more just culture or country, because think about the state of play on January 6th, 2021. So on January 6th, 2021, you had outspoken evangelicals up and down the federal government. You had your cohort of evangelicals in the House and in the Senate. You had like an evangelical chief of staff in the White House. You had evangelical vice president of the United States who did do the right thing. Right. But you had a cohorts of evangelical activists all around the White House. You had let me put it this way. If you told my 25-year-old self that if you fast forward to the year 2021 and that these outspoken Christian figures would be at so many key positions, my 25-year-old self would have been like, oh, and this must be a more just and humane country, right? No, well, we had a violent attack on the Capitol, and then that was instigated by some of these people who are outspoken Christians. And you had people outspoken. In many ways, it was religious violence itself on January 6th. You had people praying, singing, worship music being sung. I mean, it was crazy. And so what that shows you is that just putting people in your, quote, Christian tribe in power does not automatically lead to justice in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, if you elevate Christian power and you view the exercise of power as somehow proof of divine favor, you're actually pretty much guaranteeing that you're going to be becoming more authoritarian and more unjust, because power becomes the object, power becomes the goal.
Your 2020 book, Divided We Fall, America's Succession Threat and How to Restore Our Nation, you discussed the dangers of polarization and advocated for engaging with people who have opposing viewpoints. 5 years now after your book was written, how's that going?
It's funny, Michael, when I was writing it, I was actually nervous about it because that subtitle, the secession threat, I thought people will think, oh, you're an alarmist. You're not. Because one of the things I try to do is to be against alarmism, unnecessarily alarmism, because it's sort of that sense like America's almost over that is driving people crazy. But the point that I was making is that there's no truly important social, cultural, political, religious trend that's pulling us together as much as it's pushing us apart. And this just can't go on forever. And so the book comes out in September 2020, and it got a good reception and people were very curious about it, but I could tell that hint of like, really? And then January 6th happens. And now, just from my purely, how do you like this part of your brain, whenever you write a book, like, oh, dang, if my book had come out January 7th, then, but it was really a eye-opening moment for a lot of people. And I think that what's the first few months of this new Trump term have also shown people how unstable our republic is becoming. And I'm not saying that we're on the verge of some sort of an imminent secession or anything like that. But what I am saying is we're on an unsustainable path.
Yeah.
And Trump is making it more unsustainable every day. Because if you think of it this way, what we're basically asking is for one party to become materially more moral and honorable and restrained than the other party.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very difficult ask if the less honorable, less restrained, less moral party wins. Okay.
Right.
So then you're saying to these other people, and by the way, I'm not singing the praises of the Democratic Party. I mean, some of the revelations about Joe Biden and the deception and dishonesty around that, the Democrats should have a real reckoning. Like, so
Right.
they're not approaching the public with clean hands right now. But it is very difficult to sustain a republic where you say, well, one party has to win for America to maintain basic constitutional norms. Because in a two-party democracy, one party isn't going to win all the time.
One party isn't going to win all the time. And since you brought up the Joe Biden thing, you know, and I appreciate your comments about them not having clean hands. But I look at it this way. Look at it this way. They just put on the gloves that the Republicans are wearing. So why would we judge how they protected their guy so much more with a highbrow than the way that Republicans have protected their guy? And their guy is criming the hell out of stuff. I mean, they're just protecting a guy who just, you know, who's having some health issues versus the guy who the party can't even admit. I mean, the man lies to us and tell us he's 225 pounds.
Yeah. Well,
come on now, y'all
there's a couple of reasons.
Biden because he slurs his words.
Well, there's a couple of reasons, and I think reason number one is this: if your measure becomes, don't judge us because we're bad, but not as bad as the other people.
Right.
Let's just go ahead and
pull
the ripcord on this whole thing. Like, I mean, seriously. And this is a constant thing. And like you see on Twitter, you'll say, hey, here's a bad thing. And rather than defending and sort of saying, no, you're wrong, this isn't bad, they say, well, no, the other side did the same thing or worse.
Right.
What the other side doing the same thing or worse doesn't make your bad thing okay.
Right.
So that's reason number one. And then reason number two is just there's the raw reality that we're losing massive trust in institutions, we're losing trust in individuals. And so if you actually run somebody for a second term who's not up to the job, they're just not up to the job, you're going to increase that lack of public trust.
Yeah.
And Michael, I think we're so used to subpar politicians now who can barely even speak, who don't even know the basics of civics. Like just before I logged on to record the podcast, I watched Kristi Noem.
Oh my God.
Didn't know what habeas corpus was. And this is,
we're going to get that clip. We're going to get that clip, and we're going to put that clip in here so people know exactly what you're talking about, because it is wild. She had no idea what it was. But go ahead, you continue.
Yeah. And so, we're absolutely becoming used to just incompetence and dishonesty out of our politicians. And we're also becoming used to just kind of stupidity and ignorance at the same time. Not long ago, I went back and I was just doing one of these. I was bored one evening and kind of flipping through YouTube. I know. I was flipping through YouTube and I saw a coverage of one of the last, it wasn't a press conference, it was a sit down in the White House. And it was in, I think, late 87 with Reagan and the broadcast network anchors. So it's ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. And they're talking about the Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile Treaty. And so this is in 1987 Reagan. So it's near the end of his second term. We now know that maybe he was possibly having some early onset issues.
Right.
It was like watching an Oxford debating society compared to what we see in any given day on the news now. Reagan interacting with those four. The news anchors were sharp. They were prepared. They asked hard questions. Reagan was sharp. He was prepared. They dove deep into nuclear strategy and deterrence and theory. And I mean, it was, you would be shocked at the contrast. And this is something, Michael, I teach undergrads, and so I've gotten to the point where I start to say, guys, I'm just sorry, because, by this point, we're now 10 years into this Trump world. And if I've got a 20-year-old undergrad that I'm teaching, their entire political life, existence is defined by this nonsense. Yeah. They have no idea. I mean, seriously, I remember watching the Obama-Romney debates, and I was all in for Mitt Romney.
Mm-hmm. Same here.
And I'm watching the debates, and at the time, I did not realize it, but I feel like those were the last sophisticated policy debates that we've had in this country at the presidential level.
They were.
I mean, go back and watch them. And both of them, I'm watching them, and I'm kind of mad at Obama because, I was happy for Romney in debate 1, and I was sad in debate 2. But then you don't really realize what you've got till it's gone, because if you go back and look at it, they're both complimentary of each other when it's appropriate. They're both, stern with each other when it's appropriate, but they're both quite sophisticated in their policy analysis. Like, this is how politicians should debate.
Right.
And we had no idea what we had. And then now it's completely gone. And we're seeing a generation who doesn't even know it existed in the first place.
Right. And that tells us a lot about what the future potential looks like in terms of civic participation, because their view of politics has become so distorted by poor performance, poor articulation of facts, if facts are included at all. Now, truth is whatever you think it is in the moment. I mean, all these things that we've seen kind of slapped around a bit rhetorically and otherwise in the last 10 years is shaping the civic behavior of the next generation of leaders. So to your point, it becomes important that we try to figure out how to rewire this thing as soon as we possibly can, because if that generation is now in a position poised to be the next leaders of the country at any level, wow. Just wow. I mean, if you've got young people today seemingly believing that, it's okay to accept gifts from foreign governments of whatever magnitude. I can ignore what the courts tell me, or I could just randomly go after my political opponents. That does not bode well for the country if they're looking at political leadership that's not responding and saying, stop, time, no, that's not what we do.
I think that's very well said. And here's what I'm also worried about. So as politics becomes more gross, as the people who are political leaders become, and not everybody, we both know that there are politicians that we admire and respect. They're out there. They do exist. So I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. But as we see, as the dominant political culture becomes one of lying, Machiavellian, will to power, gross corruption. I mean, the gift of a new Air Force One to Trump, grossly corrupt. So as you see lying, gross corruption, dishonesty, cruelty, marking politics, who is drawn to that? Who's drawn to that? Not great people, right? Not great people. It's sort of like, imagine, probably not the best people enter to the porn industry, right? Like that's not drawing the top-notch people. The more politics becomes depraved, the more the depraved will be drawn to politics. And so this is and now politics has never had a particularly sterling reputation.
No, it hasn't.
But it's had a better reputation than this. And the worse it gets, the worse people will be drawn to it. And just think of it yourselves. I mean, to the listeners, think of the people who are the most vocal about politics that you know in your life. Are they also the best people you know in your life? Maybe, but probably not, right?
Probably not, yeah.
Probably
and
not.
That includes your grandma. I'm sorry, but it does.
Well,
because grandmas can be a little bit out there as well. We know that.
Well, and a lot of grandmas and grandpas are being kind of, I need to write this piece, but one of the things that frustrates me the most about right-wing media is how perfectly it has created an engine of creating anger, discontent, and fear in older Americans. To the point where, people I know and love who are in their golden years, who have grandchildren that love them, they have their family around them, they're retired from good jobs and have good retirement benefits. Like, this should be a time where you're really doubling down on hearth and home and family and loving the people around you. They're consumed with fear about this thing they saw in right-wing media or that thing they saw in right-wing media. And, I had to establish a rule with somebody I love very much, an older gentleman I love very much, where I just said, when we're together, let's please not talk about anything any one of us has seen on television news. That's the détente. We can talk about SEC football all day. We can talk about all of that. But if we saw it on cable news, we can't talk about it.
Can't talk about it.
And, and he very graciously agreed to that. And it's been wonderful for our relationship. Just wonderful.
But that tells you a lot. It tells you a lot there.
It does. Absolutely.
We are talking with my buddy, David French. We're covering everything from Pope to politics. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to get into a little bit more of what we see happening out there and what the landscape looks like heading into the fall and next year. I mean, there's, the economy is going to be a big driver for a lot of families out there. And so we'll get into that with David French right after this. Vacation season is just about here, and this year I am treating myself to the top of the line upgrades I deserve with Quince's high quality travel essentials at fair prices. Now I can snag killer luxury essentials that work with my vibe and will work with my wallet, like lightweight shirts and shorts from $30, pants for any occasion, and comfortable lounge sets. Now, the best part, folks, all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Now, by partnering directly with top factories, Quince cuts out the cost of the middleman and passes those savings on to you. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices, along with premium fabrics and finishes. I love that. A few months ago, I got the most beautiful scarves from Quince, and I can't wait to shop again now that the weather is warm. Their style is great, their quality is amazing, and the price is just right. And you can experience this too. So for your next trip, treat yourself to the luxe upgrades you deserve from Quince. Go to quince.com/steele for 365-day returns, plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/steele to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/steele. All right, folks, let's take a quick break from the discussion and talk about protecting yourself in the digital world we live in. Because whether you're scrolling the news, booking travel, or doing research, you deserve online privacy that works as hard as you do. That's why my team uses Surfshark VPN for this podcast. It encrypts your internet activity, keeping your private data away from trackers, hackers, and anyone else trying to snoop. You can even safely browse on public Wi-Fi at airports, hotels, coffee shops, you name it. And here's a game changer. With just one subscription, Surfshark secures all your devices, laptops, phones, tablets. You're covered. Plus, if you're traveling or living abroad, Surfshark lets you break through GEO restrictions, so you can still catch your favorite shows, news, and sports, just like you're back at home. And let's not forget Surfshark Search. No ads, no tracking, just clean private searching. So here's the deal. Head over to surfshark.com/steele or use the code STEELE at checkout, and you'll get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Absolutely free. And yes, it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Surfshark VPN. It's time to take control of your online security. Surfshark.com/STEELE or code Steele at checkout for 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN for free. Surfshark.com/Steele. Welcome back, everybody. Michael Steele podcast here, hanging out with my buddy David French. You know him from the New York Times. You know him from the Atlantic. You know him from his book, Divided We Fall. David, there is right now, as we were going to break, you were talking about your friend and how you two kind of set some rules of engagement with each other. I have a different approach. I just basically, as the Bible says, I just, shake the dust off my shoe and keep trekking. I ain't got time to explain shit. I ain't got time to understand shit. I'm like, I'm sorry. If you that stupid, I can't help you. So that's me. That's my approach. Because I'm dealing with intelligent people. I'm dealing with people who've come through it all. Particularly when you talk about a generation that lived through Depression, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all these civil rights. And we're part of those struggles. Now sitting back and going, yeah, we can just strip away the rights of citizens. Yeah, the government can just grab people off the street and they're defending it. I can't wrap my head around that. So that's why I love reading what you write a lot of times, because you do have a way of helping us kind of wrap our heads around a lot of what we're seeing and putting it in the proper context. When you're looking down the road, you were talking about you've got to write this piece that we were just talking about, and how the right-wing echo chamber has created this sense of fear and desperation and, oh my God, they're coming for you, and people buying that. What's the anecdote? How do we begin culturally to help people understand if I'm going to move to the David French side of the yard, that's going to say, okay, let's find that thing that we can talk about without having to deal with crazy, versus where I am is like, the hell with you, I'm moving past your stupid. What's that space look like?
Okay, so let me just begin to say,
okay, I'm getting on the couch right now, David. David, the psychology session is.
If I had the answer, I wish I had the answer, but I will tell you stories of experiences that I've had that have helped, because there's no magic bullet here. Right. But here's what I found. If you can move hyper-political people out of politics and engage with them as human beings outside of politics, that has a positive secondary effect over time. And in this very important way, what you have to understand about people who are hyper into politics is when they're hyper partisan, they don't see you as a fully realized human being anymore. They will see you as an enemy. They see you as a bad person. Okay. And so everything, when you're having that political conversation with them, when you're disagreeing with them in that political conversation, all you're doing is you're reaffirming to them that they're right and that you're a bad person. Okay. When you can reconnect with somebody on terms that are not political and they can see you and know you outside of that, it begins to create a cognitive dissonance with the caricature that they have. And so, and this is something that I think it's one of the reasons why when I encounter somebody, there's sort of two ways I approach a conversation. If somebody is saying, I heard the 2020 election was stolen by Italian military satellites. Is that true? That's an invitation to an actual conversation. That question, I'll dive into that all day long. We'll have that conversation. Right. But if somebody is saying the 2020 election was stolen by those Italians and it's a declaration, I will sort of say, hey, can we not talk about that right now? Because Nick's the Eastern Conference Finals about to start. Who you got, right? Right. And so you can move from that pivot. Because they don't want to have a conversation there. They want to have they don't want a dialogue.
The confrontation.
They want a confrontation. Yes. Yeah. And I don't want to play that game with them because they're not open. They're not open. The question indicates openness. The declaration indicates that they're closed. Now, they might get open at a different later date. I don't want to give up on people. But
Right.
I'm just not going to feed the beast in that moment. And so that's how I approach it. I can't say that it always is great. It doesn't always, work. But I have seen really positive changes in people just by moving them off of politics, sort of reintroducing yourself to them as a fully realized human being. And then when politics comes back into play, there's just more nuance and there's just more regard and appreciation for the opposing point of view.
That lines up with I think how we both sort of wrote about Pope Leo. So going back, so we're now connecting.
Ooh, I like the symmetry. Yeah.
Right. We're connecting a very big dot here because I noted at the end of my piece on MSNBC, I said, as much as our polarized country will try to put the new Pope in a political box, especially because he's an American, Leo will confound the petty partisan attempts to distract from his mission to extend the peace of Christ to the world so that each one of us will see Christ in those we serve. You likewise noted that, the diversity of the American Christian voice, containing multitudes of voices, as does Leo. He appears to be of mixed race. You talk about his ethnicity and how that's reflective of that sort of broadness. Again, being a White Sox fan, he's down with lost causes, as you know. But it is
Peruvian, a bishop in Peru for decades. Yeah,
right, exactly. But you said, I felt the cultural wind shift just a tiny bit. An American man who confounds political categories now leads the world's largest church. As a friend texted me right after the Pope's election was announced, that shift almost feels like hope. And so that goes to the heart of how you begin to turn the corner with folks. And that is in those moments. And this is something I have to learn because I've been so inundated with it. I've kind of grown hardened and really dismissive in many respects. But you're saying that's the moment where you see that glimmer of hope that you have to grab a hold to and bring that person into that space. In the first instance where they're asking, the second instance is harder, but still, even when they're declarative, you're saying, okay, I'm not going to do that right now. How about we watch the game? How about we talk about your mama's pie because it was amazing? Yeah. Let's, that kind of sort of moving it around to bring into, and this is my thing with what's going on with Joe Biden. To be honest, I get the politics of all of that, and I'm not dismissive of that. And to your earlier point, that there will be a political price that's going to be paid for how his staff and the people around him basically deceive the country. Okay. But in this moment, it is the humanity of the man that carries the moment for me, not all the other stuff. And so is that getting to that point where people are less stuck on the politics and more stuck on the humanity that we all share?
Yeah. And I think that's where the Leo selection is very instrumental. Unfortunately, because Trump has been so tied to the religious right, there is a perception building in the United States right now that culturally, it's just a cultural matter. If you're an outspoken Christian, you're also going to be voting for Trump. Now, that is not true in the Black church in any way, shape, or form.
Nope.
But it is increasingly true in other branches of American Christianity. You've seen it in white evangelical spaces. You're seeing it in Latino spaces.
Yep.
You're even seeing it in some mainline denominations where over time, the share of the Republican vote in the Trump world, in the Trump era, has steadily increased the more someone identifies as a Christian, which to me is a grievous problem, because the sort of idea that Trump and Christianity are in any way connected, that one goes with the other, I think is just a grievous mistake. And so having an American Pope who's a living embodiment with all of the worldwide influence that a Pope has, who says, no, there's an entirely different and alternative way of approaching politics and faith that is completely different from that which has been modeled by the Republican Christian activist world. I think that's very important.
No, I think you're right about that, and it's part of the challenge, because you've got, see, in listening to what you're saying, the one thing that keeps coming back to me, particularly when you're looking at the movement towards my Christian activism is aligned with my political activism. And so they become this sort of intertwined thing that represents itself in one form. And that, to your point, is, you check the box for Trump, you check the box for, MAGA or whatever. And my question is, how do you begin to unpack that? I mean, how do you begin to help people recognize that your views on immigration goes against the chief immigrant that you supposedly are aligned with, named Jesus Christ? You forget the brother was running for his life from a government that wanted to kill him as a baby, right? He was this migrant who went from town to town, and the people didn't necessarily want him there. So when he would stop and he would talk to people, he's imparting these lessons. When you talk about how Christ looked at women, for example, and one of my favorite, is the woman at the well, and sort of talking about, what we owe each other and what our responsibility is one to the other. How do you help people kind of contextualize that and recognize, no, the driver shouldn't be your politics. The driver should be what's in that book that you carry around with you every Sunday, that you seemingly don't Monday through Saturday.
Well, let me, this is just a fact. There is an enormous amount of biblical illiteracy in the evangelical church. Just enormous. So, when you're talking about, well, how can somebody believe X when the Bible says Y? They have no clue. The Bible says Y. So if they're going to church, they're really drawing their cues from what other people do around them. So that sort of the culture of the church, what other people do in the church. They draw their cues from their pastor, but they also really draw their cues from the political media that they consume. And so right-wing political media is very religiously infused. So if you are watching right-wing media, you're going to have a perception that this is where the Christians are. That's sort of the perception that's given off. This is where your Christians are. And so if you identify as a Christian, it's like walking into a room and you're wearing a Bills jersey and you're looking at all of the different, like it's the NFL draft and there's representatives of every team, and you see the other Bills jerseys and you just head straight there. That's sort of the impression created by right-wing media, for example. This is where the Christians are. And so it sends so many people there just culturally, to the point where I love to tell the story. My friend Russell Moore tells the story of a pastor who finishes a sermon that he gave on the Beatitudes, turn the other cheek, and, love your enemies, et cetera, and bless those who persecute you. And this person comes up and says, why are you sharing those liberal talking points? And the pastor's like, what are you talking about? These are Jesus's words. But that's, so when people don't know scripture, then they're very vulnerable to people who are out there telling them what scripture says, or telling them what it means to be a Christian. And you just see this all over. And, there are surveys and survey questions asked of self-described evangelicals about basic points of theology, like super basic, and consistently shocking numbers or shocking percentages of evangelicals just get it wrong. And so I think a lot of what's happening is that the leadership of the church and sort of the leadership of the various political movements are creating a cultural impression that this is what Christianity means. And that cultural impression is at odds with a Bible that they're not reading. And so it becomes very difficult to make a biblical argument with people who are not reading the Bible.
Well, it's funny you say that when you tell that story, because there was a Newsweek article that came out in December of originally August of 23, but it was updated in December 24, in which the headline was "Evangelicals are now rejecting quote liberal teachings of Jesus," and you have a number of pastors expressing the very concern that you're talking about. And others who are trying to help their congregants wrap their head around the fact that they have blended, to be polite, their political views into how they're reading the Gospels and how what they're hearing being taught on Sundays or Bible study. They're interpreting it in a way that is antithetical to the actual words of Christ. I mean, the fact that you would sit there and complain about something that Christ said, like you exampled, turning the other cheek, that somehow that's a liberal woke kind of philosophy. So before I let you get out of here, so how do you now see all of this as we move into the rest of this term, the least the first part up till next year, where the country will have a chance to cast its judgment at the ballot box next November?
So here's what I'm worried about, Michael. This is what concerns me. I am very concerned that American political polarization has grown to such an extent that even the cruelty, the manifest cruelty, like sending people to a prison that would be illegal in America, that it is so cruel and vicious, and sending them there with no intention of ever letting them go, based on what exactly? We now know that about what a Cato Institute study found, that 50 of the people who were sent to the CCOT prison were in America illegally. I mean, what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. The violations of the First Amendment. What concerns me is that the hatred is so much that no Republicans won't waver when all of this is happening. They'll just cheer because it's bad things are happening to people they hate. And then the other thing is, I'm worried that in the absence of an economic crisis, that nobody should wish on anybody, because when there are economic crises, people get hurt badly. Right. So in the absence of an economic crisis, is the American conscience able to be pricked to reject Trumpism? Or are we doomed to deal with Trumpism so long as the economy remains strong? Because most people are sort of checked out of politics. And as long as they're fine in their own personal circumstances, that they aren't really wanting to even dive in and think about things like the First Amendment, or think about things like the Fifth Amendment or the 14th Amendment, or don't care about injustices inflicted on other Americans. And Michael, I had really hoped that America had moved past its pre-civil rights era morality, where look, lots of Americans were totally fine with Black Americans facing a horrible life existence, horrible oppression, as long as they were okay, as long as they were fine. I don't want to be in a situation where Americans will tolerate and put up with immense amounts of cruelty and injustice so long as they can make the house payment and they can make the car payment and they can have a nice vacation. And I'm afraid that's where we're heading, where people are checking out so much out of politics and have so much animosity to their opponents, that really elections are no longer referenda, or aren't referenda on decency, morality, or the Constitution at all. They're just a referenda on how am I doing right now? And that is what alarms me. And that is how countries slide into authoritarianism. You see it all around the world, where if the authoritarian can deliver basic economic stability and prosperity, they're going to be given a lot of rope and a lot of room to run on violating civil liberties, on crushing dissent, on consolidating power. And so that is what is concerning me right now. And then when they wake up, when the economy does turn and the lines, as it always does, for food and gas
and basics, and the shelves are empty because the supply chain has been broken or obliterated, then they're going to turn to and look for the ability to speak against the government or to raise their hand in opposition, and they then will be hauled off to that space, that jail that otherwise would be illegal in this country. And there will be no one to help defend or protect their rights because they will already have been shipped off and taken away.
Look,
and there is a lot of truth to the way those stories play out.
Well, if you look at it like this, in a two-party country that is closely divided, and it's so funny how triumphant MAGA is, over 49.9% of the vote. This is a closely divided country, okay?
Right.
In a closely divided country where there's one thing and that is your opponent is going to win, and your opponent's probably going to win again soon. And so every civil liberty you take from your opponents, every freedom, every right you take from your opponents, you give them the authority and ability to take that from you when they win.
Yep.
So in that circumstance, violating civil liberties it's a fool's errand.
Yeah.
You're hurting yourself when you do that.
Yeah.
You're just hurting yourself. But you can't tell that to the deep MAGA partisans because they think they've cracked the code. They think they're just going to keep winning and winning and winning forever. And so they don't have any concern for the First Amendment right now. They don't have any concern for the Fifth Amendment right now. But and then they're counting on and hoping, I suppose, that a Democrat who follows them has ethics and honor and supports the rule of law and doesn't flip it around back on them.
Right, right.
But
that executive order declaring that guns are no longer permitted. You can have no more than one, whatever it is, right? Those things that you think are going to be there forever. Trust me, if you get a rogue Democratic president behaving like Trump, with people behaving like Steve Miller around him, what you gonna do? Who you gonna call?
Yeah. Who are you going to call? And, it's so funny,
the
Michael.
Court's already said he's got immunity. Everything's an official act.
Well, Michael, you raise it's so funny you raise that exact hypo because that was a hypo that was thrown at the administration during the birthright citizenship oral argument.
Yes.
So what if a Democratic president orders total gun confiscation by executive order? Would you support a district court enjoining that order nationally? And the kind of backpedaling and sidestepping and everything, but the answer that a lot of these hyper-partisans have is don't bother me with that hypothetical. We're not going to lose. We're going to be running the place.
Right. There you go.
And
there we go.
And that's, history shows that's a foolish judgment to make.
Remember Hitler was planning the Fourth Reich, right? He was planning
the 1,000-year Reich, the 1,000-year
Reich. Yeah, brother couldn't get to 1946. So,
yeah.
My man, I love it. David French, thank you, friend. Thank you so much for your time, your insights. Really appreciate the book, Divided We Fall, America's Secession Threat and How to Restore Our Nation. It's out. You got another book? You working on a new one or what you doing?
I've got one percolating here, Michael. I've got one percolating, but I got to find the time. I mean, when you're a constitutional lawyer and also somebody writes about constitutional law, and you probably have the most serial offender in modern American history, at least since probably Woodrow Wilson, on violating the Constitution. Right. It's hard for me to take a breath.
Well, we love it when you're writing and you're informing and you're teaching. Keep doing that, my friend. David French, folks, he's a special thought leader out there. So please follow him on Twitter at David A. French. Are you on Blue Sky?
I am on Blue Sky. David French JAG. J-A-G.
There you go. Check him out there, and certainly check out his work from the New York Times, the Atlantic, etc. David, thanks again, my friend.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it.
All right. That does it for now, folks. Love it when you do that thing that makes me smile. That's downloading and sharing and liking. It's all very good. Appreciate you for that. And remember what I always tell you, don't play with stupid, okay? Because you wind up doing stupid things that you don't need to do. Until next time.
So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right
let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President
habeas
Lincoln
corpus,
used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the live free or die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let us be clear, though,
it has never been done. It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress.